So much of the editing process is building blocks.
We are putting two pieces of film together and trying to create the illusion of a spatial relationship or the illusion of a continuous action.
And then you can cut back to her. That shot right there.
You do need that close-up of him.
I think it's too soon.
Too soon, yeah.
Editing is so key with everything in terms of conveying meaning, creating drama.
Oh, God. Is that the best performance take on him?
I think it's the best one.
The great thing about editing is you can sort of sculpt and create.
You can shape and shave and move around and play with the time.
Do you think the other one's better than this?
I like this. I think this is better.
One of the great things about editing is you never know what you can get away with and what you can't get away with until you try it.
That's good. That's much better.
Editing is really the last step of writing. One of the most fundamental lessons you have to learn as a writer, if you're working in film or TV, is that your script is a blueprint.
Writing is just trying to really communicate as best as you possibly can to everybody who's going to need to make it real, what it is that you see. The script is just a map. It's really a starting place, and everything is a layer that goes on top of it.
Hey, if she wants to go and play, you can just let her go.
Well, she hasn't really played with that many kids yet.
Oh, well, at this age, they play next to each other, not with each other. It's called parallel play.
Parallel Play was a very ambitious episode. It was long. It had a lot of locations. It was fairly diffuse in its scope.
Okay, rehearsal's up.
It was a complicated episode.
Okay, Freddie, you set? Rehearsing and action.
When you're making an episode,
You basically come up with all the raw material, the lines, the performances, the footage, the coverage.
and you have a sense of how you think it's going to fit together. Basically, inside of that big pile of footage, there's a really good episode and a really bad episode. And so your job in editing is to find the good movie that's inside that pile. But a lot of people do not realize just how important the editorial process is in terms of making the difference between average and good or between good and great.
It's much
Great
better.
job, Michael. Yay.
That's
Yay,
way
that was
more what it
great.
needs to be.
In the early stages of editing, you have what's called an editor's cut. Really sort of this first experience, if you will, of the film, where you're just experimenting almost with how much leverage you can take to create emotional moments between the characters. When I look at the different takes of each performance, I try to sort of absorb what came out of that piece of film.
Perhaps white with her favorite color.
What can we convey through an image that goes next to another image? Sort of the impact of two pieces of film and how the juxtaposition of those two moments creates a third moment. And I'll construct a scene so that I'll be able to get to that moment.
I think she might like that. She would like that. That's good.
And that's really what editing is.
Your little boys are so cute. The big one looks exactly like his daddy.
And then the director comes into the cutting room after the editor's done his assembly. One of your biggest jobs as a director is just to make sure that when you get in the cutting room, you have everything you need, and that you have some choices.
So rather than go back to this semi-wide shot, we go back to the high-wide, and then cut back to Keith and David.
Because sometimes you find that you thought the scene was about this, but then when you look at it in the cutting room, it's like, actually, the scene is really about that. And that character isn't the main person in the scene, it's really this person. There was a certain style that was established very early on in Alan Ball's pilot, which was that he really wanted things to just play out. And that's quite unique to this show.
I think we'll substitute him and Ruth through the fire rather than this angle.
Editing is very important in focusing the audience's attention. Who gets the close-ups, who gets more time. You know, every scene is shot from 5 or 6 or 7 different angles, and you can, at any point in the scene, you can cut to any of them.
Just go from here right to the wide.
To the wide.
There's really only one perfect way to cut it. There's one essential way, and the editor helps you to find that best way.
Okay, we're good.
On an episodic television show, the director does a few days of cutting, hands over his cut, and leaves. It's just the way it is, and most of the cutting is done by the producers. That means in the room, it's the editor, the writer of that particular episode, and then Alan and myself. And we generally spend an additional 2 weeks working on that cut before we get a version that we consider to be the producer's cut.
I've got caller ID, you little idiots.
Sitting through the first cut of an episode is a really jarring experience because you edit it in your mind. And in your mind, it's beautiful, it's funny, it's moving, it works seamlessly, and it's complete. But instead, you're watching all these pieces of film that don't quite fit together the way you want them to.
Is her face always the same in all the close-ups, Michael?
We froze her at the most extreme.
Is it going to be totally unmatchable with the overhead shot?
It's kind of more horrifying without the face.
Yeah,
All right, let's lose
I
the
think
face.
so.
We'll labor over every take of every angle of a scene to find exactly the right performance moment or exactly the right rhythm.
You're funny.
Do we have to do it that way?
No.
You sort of accept that you're getting into the rink with very smart and mostly brilliant people. And your only shield is you have the machine and how fast you can push the buttons.
No.
Should we look at all of your
Let's look
funnies
at-
for a
yeah,
minute?
Let's look at the funnies. There's also the big wide too for the funny. But this, I think this actually is the most.
I think it's the best one. Yeah.
You're funny.
We've moved lines around within scenes. We've taken moments that weren't really filmed and kind of created them.
So now what? Am I supposed to just avoid that particular mommy in me? To
Once the I cease to exist, it is the most vulnerable for him.
so I just cease to exist. And so do you.
It's needlepoint in a way, and every stitch is important, and that's why it really is taking the time to watch a scene over and over again, to pull it apart, to try every different way of making those pieces fit together, to try to create a mood, a moment, a certain piece of continuity.
There are a lot of things in this house that aren't even mine. Like that Mammy cookie jar. That comes from your father's side. A lot of stuff needs to just go.
I personally prefer it if people could just come upstairs and, like, bid on my entire room.
There's a kind of running story arc through the episode that Ruth is going to have a garage sale and get rid of all the junk in the house.
Hey, Mom, why don't we just burn what's left over? I think you're right, Claire. Let's burn it. Let's burn it all.
Closing an episode is a big burden, and a complicated episode like this needed something that was really going to soar with you.
This is the scene where they're all standing around the fire, and the bonfire kind of, culminates as yet another version of parallel play, because it seems as though it should be this communal thing where everybody's standing around the fire.
But they're all in their own little worlds.
Everybody's kind of seeing their reflections, seeing their pain reflected in the fire.
There was a shot of the house, and then we introduced all the characters around. And this was in my initial editor's cut, where you saw who was there. So you saw David and Keith, Ruth and George. If you saw Anita and Claire, then we see Claire get an idea and she goes upstairs.
Claire runs up to her bedroom, she puts on some music. There was quite a bit of discussion about what kind of music should play. When we shot the scene, we used a piece of music by Death Cab for Cutie that Lauren Ambrose selected. And that, I think, is the music that stayed right through the director's cut. But ultimately, when the producers came in into their cut, another choice was made.
Why don't you try some of those songs I'm running for this moment?
Yeah, I wasn't in love with this movie. There was something flat about that whole sequence around the bonfire. It wasn't quite working. You want something that has a strong beginning, and those just sort of
Try the Patti Smith one.
ease in. Our music supervisors have a cut of the show without any music, and they'll show us the sequence with different music.
We'll feed the editors a lot of music that we just think might be interesting for this character over the course of time, or certain circumstance that we know may come up. And what we try to do is we try to sort of navigate the emotions of how the scene is developing. And so we tried a lot of different choices to try to get to the right answer.
We had tried everything from, Jimi Hendrix to Jeff Buckley to Wilco.
Gary at one point found the Radiohead track, Lucky.
I remember the first time that we watched and Thomas and Gary put that track against it, how it made the fire seem more moving. It made the episode seem more moving.
For me, it gave the sequence the kind of emotional weight that it needed.
And so I feel like that we were really lucky, no pun intended, to get the song. But it was a long search.
The whole scene is really a scene about Nate's catharsis, finally letting go of some things that belong to Lisa and letting go of her memory in a certain way.
You hold her?
Okay. The overall focus of the ending with the fire was Nate's journey and closure, and that was what I think the editing really focused on as far as how it changed.
As written and as originally filmed, when Nate throws the bedclothes, he throws them on the ground. And then he comes downstairs and picks them up and puts them on the fire.
There was this kind of two-step process that I assumed would be the natural flow of things.
And I think what we found is that this sequence was taking a little long to play out.
We realized this is very laborious. We've had like 18 cuts in this scene. We have all this and we haven't even gotten to the meat of it.
I still feel like the whole sequence lasts too long. Yeah. Are we totally married to it having to be real time? Can we do some crossfades in there?
A big part of editing is compression, just getting from A to B. The audience always wants to feel like they're moving forward, not just sitting still. So anything that furthers Nate's storyline, you want to get to that quicker.
I'm wondering if once he actually goes up, you have it all be him throwing stuff down, it goes in the fire.
Michael Ruscio had the thought that maybe I can make this work as if he's throwing them out of the coach house window and landing on top of the fire. And if you look at the footage, you'd say, no way. That's never going to work, because when you look at the wide shots, you see the windows up here and the bonfire is here. So it really went against logic.
He's kind of Herculean that he can actually do it and aim, but emotionally it's what you want to have happen. It needs to be big like that.
And lo and behold, when you see the finished cut, it's seamless. There used to be a wide shot in that sequence. By avoiding that, by avoiding reminding the audience just how far the bonfire is away from the window, we see it fall on the fire. We accept that as fact. He threw it, it fell on the fire.
And that's so much more powerful, and it's so much more direct and succinct.
And then we have a series of reaction shots. And by the time we go back to the wide shot, our mind has moved on.
When I wrote this, it wasn't originally the last scene of the episode. The bonfire ends with a...
Someone called the fire department.
I don't think you're allowed to have a fire so close to a home.
Everything was charred, and George and Ruth were talking.
We really appreciate you not giving us a citation.
Claire was on the fire truck with her friend Anita. They were flirting, they were putting the hat on, and like being cute and fresh and free.
At the same time, Nate is walking off. In fact, what was scripted for the end of that episode was he lies down on the grass and he looks up at the sky and he takes his wedding ring off. And what ended up happening was that we shot the stuff with the firemen and the fire truck and all that stuff. And the very last shots of Nate lying in the grass we didn't get.
So initially in the editor's cut, I just dealt with the material that we had and sort of faded out to white on Nate looking. When I started to work with Jeremy, we really sort of honed in on that ending. So he was always planning to shoot the ending. So we had, cards, overhead shot, Nate close up, and we designed through the use of these placards what the ending was going to be. Now at that point in the early producer's cut, we were still going to do the ending.
David and Keith flirting with the fireman. It looks like David is flirting with the fireman and Keith is staring at him thinking, you big whore.
Do we need it to get into these?
And we were trying to come up with ways to make it work, and eventually I think we just realized that, you know what, you don't need it. We keep trying to make this thing work, and maybe the reason it isn't working is because we don't really need it.
An episode tells you when it needs to be over. And in this episode, it was really clear it was the bonfire. All the points of the story had been made. And so you get out at your strongest point.
Mom, I'm moving back into the house.
Okay. You can have Iker's room.
Can I have the coach house then?
Well, I don't see why not.
And then what we did is that final two-shot of Nate and Ruth, we manufactured a slow push-in on them to give it a little bit more weight. And just that thing in and of itself, of them watching the fire and them watching the traces of, those people in their lives go up in smoke, felt like we weren't going to top that.
You're really left with this fire that becomes spiritual and meaningful in a way that it didn't really when we had so much material following it.
Sometimes you don't really know in the shooting what's going to have the most impact, but when you look at it finally in the cutting room, you see what has the most power. The overall effect is the most important thing when you're looking at the final cut.
And the somber ending is really the 6 Feet Under ending.
And then you're left with the ultimate whiteout.
It's difficult for me to say what it is about our process that makes it special, but I would have to say it's that notion that there is something deeper than just two-dimensional images, dialogue, and sound cues.
When I came onto the show, I knew right away this was not like any other show. It had a completely different feeling about it. And it wasn't just the script and the content, it was really how things played out in the frame and how things were cut together.
My family is gone, and no one can ever replace them. But this is what life is, right? Pain. Pain followed by more pain.
It's maybe a little more leisurely in the pace than what a lot of American television is, but it really pays off in terms of the depth of emotion that you can generate. When we have a tight close-up, it's an important moment, and it means something.
In our experience editing the show, we do hold on people's emotions. It's refreshing as opposed to, the quick cutting style of many other shows. People ask how you can be an editor and look at the same thing over and over again. As a matter of fact, I have the same material that I deal with, and I'm always making it new. And I think that's part of the excitement of editing is that you can see it come alive.
As long as everybody's attuned to the needs of the episode, as long as people allow the episode to want what it wants, it keeps getting better.
If you think the show is funny or dramatic or heart-tugging, that's a product of the editing experience.
Editing is real labor-intensive detail work, and if you don't love it, you won't be able to bear it. But I believe it is one of the key components in making 6 Feet Under what it is and giving the show the consistency of tone, the sense of polish that it has.
The show has its own life. The show has its own energy. That part of what I think our job is recognizing that and getting out of its way and letting it become what it needs to be. Editing is really that process for me.